More than 70 million Americans voted for Donald Trump in 2020, but here's the strange part. Many of them can't actually explain what he truly stands for. Why? Because Trump has built his entire career on contradictions so big they almost don't make sense. He's a billionaire who claims to fight for the forgotten working class. He's the leader of a party that calls itself anti-tax, yet he pushed for tariffs that are literally taxes. He promises to crush immigration, while America's most powerful industries can't survive without immigrant workers. And here's the most shocking part. These contradictions don't just threaten Trump's image, they reveal something much bigger, the unraveling of America's global power. If Trump can't survive these impossible choices, can the United States survive them either? Stay tuned, because the deeper we look, the stranger and more dangerous the story gets. Number 1. The winning formula that backfires. Donald Trump's rise to power came from a formula most politicians were too afraid to use. He realized early on that politics isn't about being consistent, it's about winning over the crowd in front of you. While other candidates tried to balance facts, policies, and long-term promises, Trump did something entirely different. He told people exactly what they wanted to hear, no matter how contradictory it was. If a rally was packed with struggling workers, he promised jobs and protection. If it was a wealthy donor event, he spoke about lowering taxes and boosting business. To his supporters, this wasn't dishonesty, it was brilliance. He seemed flexible, bold, and willing to say what others wouldn't dare. But that very strategy now threatens to undo him, because contradictions eventually collide. A billionaire can only pretend to be the champion of the forgotten man for so long before the cracks show. Trump's brand of politics worked when he was the outsider, the unpredictable wild card. That's why scandals about bankruptcies, lawsuits, or even shocking allegations never fully destroyed him. He was still different. People forgave him because he wasn't like the polished politicians they distrusted. Now, however, the contradictions are catching up. His base demands one thing, the global economy demands another, and Trump is stuck in between. The same tactics that once made him unstoppable could trap him in impossible choices. Backtrack and risk losing loyalty, or push forward and watch his policies collapse. For the first time, Trump's winning formula looks like it might backfire, not just on him, but on the movement he created. And that raises a bigger question. If the foundation of his power is built on contradictions, how long before the entire structure comes crashing down? Number 2, tariffs versus the Republican legacy. For over a century, the Republican Party built its identity on one simple promise: fewer taxes. From campaign slogans to policy debates, Republicans positioned themselves as the defenders of the taxpayer, the party that would shrink government and let people keep more of their money. That message became so deeply ingrained in American politics that it was practically untouchable. And then Donald Trump came along. When Trump announced tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, and even close trading partners like Canada, many of his supporters cheered without realizing what a tariff actually is. Despite Trump's insistence that foreign countries would be forced to pay, the truth is much less flattering. A tariff is nothing more than a tax on imported goods, paid not by China, but by American companies and consumers. Importers absorb the cost at first, but quickly raise prices on everyday items to make up for it. From cars to electronics to basic household goods, the final bill lands squarely on American families. Here's where the contradiction explodes. Trump cast himself as the fighter against inflation, blaming Biden for higher costs of living. Yet his own tariff policies made the problem worse. In trying to punish foreign competitors, he ended up taxing his own base. For the Republican Party, this move cut directly against its core identity. A movement that prided itself on being anti-tax suddenly found itself cheering for a hidden tax simply because Trump packaged it as strength against China. The deeper issue is that Trump seemed to misunderstand how economics works at the most basic level. By insisting that China will pay, he revealed either a willingness to bend the truth or a lack of knowledge about global trade. Either way, the contradiction is clear. A Republican president promising tax cuts on one hand, while quietly imposing one of the largest tax increases on American consumers in decades, Number 3, immigration chaos. Immigration has always been one of Donald Trump's loudest talking points, and for many of his supporters, it's the defining issue that sets him apart. From the promise of building a wall to mass deportations, Trump has positioned himself as the hardliner who would put America first. That message electrified crowds, but behind the scenes, it created a dilemma that's nearly impossible to solve. The U.S. economy, especially its most powerful industries, relies heavily on immigrant labor. Silicon Valley, for example, is fueled by engineers and programmers brought in through HB-1 visas, many of them from Asia. Entire sectors of technology, medicine, and engineering depend on talent from abroad to stay competitive. Here's the contradiction. If Trump follows through on his toughest immigration threats, he risks crippling the very industries that keep the American economy alive. For every factory worker he promises to protect, there are thousands of tech jobs, research projects, and high-growth businesses that depend on global talent. Blocking them would push innovation out of the U.S. and into countries more open to skilled migration. On the other hand, if he relaxes and allows HB-1 visas to flow, his base sees betrayal. The same supporters who rallied behind him for being uncompromising would accuse him of selling out, calling him just another politician who caved under pressure. This tension goes deeper than politics. It speaks to the very identity of the MAGA movement. Trump became acceptable to millions despite scandals and controversies because he was different. If he suddenly looks like he's making the same compromises as Bush or Clinton, he loses that aura. Immigration, then, isn't just about policy. It's a loyalty test, and either path he takes, hardline or compromise, comes with consequences that could fracture his movement. That's why immigration chaos remains one of the biggest contradictions of Trump's entire platform. Number 4, the risk of losing his own base. Donald Trump's greatest political weapon has always been his base. Fiercely loyal, emotionally invested, and willing to overlook scandals that would have destroyed any other politician, this group carried him through every controversy. From bankruptcies to lawsuits to explosive allegations, nothing seemed to shake their support. Why? Because Trump was never seen as just another politician. He was the outsider, the rule breaker, the man who said and did things that Washington elites would never dare. To his base, every attack against him was proof that he was different, and that difference is what made him untouchable. But here's the danger. The moment Trump starts to look like the very politicians he claimed to oppose, that shield of loyalty begins to crack. If he compromises on issues like immigration or global trade, even for practical reasons, his most devoted supporters may turn on him. For years, the MAGA movement has defined itself in opposition to traitors within the political system, leaders who made promises and then abandoned them. If Trump is perceived as doing the same, the backlash could be devastating. The contradiction is stark. His survival depends on appealing to a broader audience, but his identity depends on never betraying the hardcore base that brought him power. It's a balancing act with no safe middle ground. If he leans too far toward mainstream politics, his supporters will brand him a sellout. If he stays locked in with his base, he risks alienating moderates and business leaders who see his policies as unrealistic. This is the political trap Trump cannot easily escape. The very movement that lifted him into the White House could one day tear him down, because for his base, loyalty isn't just expected, it's absolute. And if they feel abandoned, they won't forgive him. Number 5, the American empire in decline. For decades, the United States stood as the undisputed superpower of the world. After World War II, its economic strength, military dominance, and cultural influence created an empire unlike anything seen before. From Hollywood to Wall Street, from NATO to Silicon Valley, America set the tone and the rest of the world followed. But today, those foundations are cracking, and the decline is becoming impossible to ignore. Rising powers like China, India, and Russia, along with the growing BRICS alliance, are reshaping the balance of global power. Together, These nations represent nearly half the world's population and economies that are growing faster than America's. Here lies the contradiction. America still projects the image of dominance, with military bases across the globe and trillions of dollars poured into defense. Yet economically, it is falling behind. According to the IMF, U.S. growth hovers around 2 to 3%, while countries like India and China double or triple that pace. And when Trump promises to make America great again, he is up against forces far larger than any campaign slogan. Tariffs, trade wars, and isolationist policies only deepen the cracks instead of fixing them. The deeper issue is denial. For years, U.S. leaders believed the empire would remain unchallenged, just as Britain once did in the 19th century. But history shows no empire lasts forever, and America's contradictions, championing free markets while punishing trade, calling for global leadership while retreating from alliances, only accelerate the decline. Trump's rise fits perfectly into this moment of weakness. He promises strength, but the policies that excite his base may push America further into decline on the world stage. The question is no longer whether the empire is slipping, it's how fast, and what role Trump's contradictions will play in speeding up the fall. Number 6. Europe's dilemma. For much of the post-war era, Europe's security and prosperity rested on a fragile bargain with the United States. America would provide the military protection through NATO and its vast arsenal, while European nations focused their resources on building generous welfare systems, free education, and healthcare that the U.S. itself never offered its citizens. It was a trade that seemed to work. The U.S. got loyal allies, and Europe avoided the crushing cost of large-scale defense spending. But today, that arrangement is unraveling. As Washington shifts its focus toward China, European leaders are realizing that the protection they once counted on may no longer be guaranteed. The war in Ukraine forced them to follow America's lead, pouring billions into a conflict their populations increasingly oppose. Polls across the continent show deep dissatisfaction, yet governments keep writing checks they can't afford. The contradiction is glaring. Europe depends on the U.S. for defense, but that dependence is becoming politically and economically unsustainable. Meanwhile, whispers of another path are growing louder. Countries like France have flirted with closer ties to BRICS, hoping to secure economic opportunities outside the shadow of Washington. Yet aligning with emerging powers risks angering the U.S. and fracturing NATO. It's a lose-lose situation. Stay loyal and face domestic backlash, or pivot away and face American pressure. The real danger is that Europe no longer controls its own fate. Trapped between its alliance with a declining empire and the rising power of global competitors, it faces a future full of contradictions it cannot easily resolve. And if America itself is losing ground, Europe's dilemma only grows sharper, because when the empire weakens, so do its dependents. Trump's contradictions aren't just his problem, they mirror the cracks running through America itself. From tariffs disguised as taxes to immigration battles, from a loyal base ready to turn on him to an empire showing signs of decline, the story is bigger than one man. It's about whether the U.S. can survive its own contradictions in a rapidly changing world. Will Trump's strategy hold, or will it collapse under its own weight? One thing is clear: the answers will shape the future of America and beyond. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over,